The room was silent, every eye on me, waiting for my next move. For 5 hours, he had ripped me apart, every word a dagger, every insult sharper than the last. I stood there numb, my career hanging by a thread, while my boss, the man who promised me a future, made me the punching bag in front of the whole team. He looked at me like I was a failure, like everything that had gone wrong was my fault. But he didn't know what was coming. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Would I crumble under the pressure, or would I finally take control? But before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you, have you ever been publicly humiliated by someone you trusted? Someone who should have had your back? What would you do if, after all the insults, you had just 3 minutes to change everything? You won't believe what happened next. I had worked at Hayes & Co. for 5 years. I started as an intern, doing the grunt work no one else wanted, and over time, I earned my place. I became a trusted project manager, overseeing multi-million-dollar deals, a small but respected cog in the complex machine of the company. But that didn't matter today. The man in charge of everything, Nathan Hayes, had always been charismatic, charming even. He was the kind of boss who knew how to make you feel like you were the most important person in the room, even if you knew deep down that wasn't true. I had always admired his ability to command respect with just a look, and for a long time, I believed that by aligning myself with him, I was securing my future. Our office was on the 43rd floor of a shiny skyscraper in downtown Chicago, the windows framing a perfect view of the city that never stopped moving. I used to love looking out those windows, the lights of the city like a constant reminder of how far I'd come. But today, all I could see was the same gray sky, the same glass walls that had once felt like a symbol of success, now reflecting a version of me I didn't recognize. Nathan had always been demanding, but today was different. Today, he wasn't just pushing for results. He was pushing for my failure. He had been looking for someone to blame, someone to scapegoat for the project's delays, and today, it was my turn. I felt the eyes of the room on me as he let loose, his words like poison. There was a time when I respected Nathan, when I believed in the work we were doing together. We'd had late-night strategy sessions, shared laughs over coffee, and celebrated the little victories. I trusted him. But trust is a fragile thing. One wrong move, one bad decision, and it all crumbles. As I stood there listening to him tear apart everything I'd worked for, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of disbelief. How had things changed so quickly? One moment, I was a rising star in the company. The next, I was the villain in my own story. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. This wasn't just about the project. This was about something bigger, something personal. Nathan was no longer the mentor I admired. There was bitterness behind his eyes. I need to show everyone in the room that he was still in control, still the one who called the shots. And I realized, as I stood there with my heart pounding in my chest, that I had been too naive, too trusting. Today wasn't just a bad meeting. It was the moment everything changed, and I wasn't going to let him destroy me without a fight. But I couldn't fight him yet. Not here, not in front of the whole office. I had to bide my time. What was my next move? Could I save myself, or had Nathan already made up his mind? The room waited in silence, everyone expecting me to fold, to apologize, to take the blame and move on. But I couldn't. Not anymore. When I first started at Hayes & Co., I was eager to prove myself. Fresh out of college, I was determined to climb the corporate ladder, to make something of myself. The first few months were nothing short of grueling. Endless coffee runs, filing papers, attending meetings that I barely understood, but I never complained. I kept my head down, learned everything I could, and watched the people around me, especially Nathan. He was everything I aspired to be. Nathan Hayes, the CEO of Hayes & Co., was an enigma. To the outside world, he was polished, perfect, the kind of leader people wrote books about. He had a way with words that made everyone feel like they were part of his grand vision. He was the kind of man who could convince a room full of hardened executives that his plan would change the world, and somehow they'd all believe it. At first, he took an interest in me, perhaps because I wasn't afraid to speak up in meetings, or because I approached every task with a level of seriousness he respected. He started to give me more responsibility. I went from managing small projects to overseeing multi-million-dollar campaigns. It felt like a dream. I was working directly under Nathan, collaborating with him on strategy sessions that lasted into the night, discussing the future of the company, exchanging ideas that seemed so revolutionary. We became a team, or at least that's how it felt. We even became friends, or so I thought. I'd go to happy hour with him and the team, listen to him talk about his ambitions, his visions for Hayes & Co., and I would hang on every word, believing that being aligned with him was the key to my success. He'd compliment me on my work, tell me that I was going places, that I was a natural. Those words stuck with me, building my confidence and trust in him. But over time, the cracks started to show. At first it was subtle. A little remark here, a dig there. Nathan started distancing himself, showing less patience with the people around him, especially me. The moments of camaraderie grew fewer, replaced by terse emails, passive-aggressive comments in meetings, and a growing tension I couldn't quite place. There were whispers, too. People talked about Nathan behind closed doors. Some said he was under a lot of pressure. Others claimed his success had gone to his head, but I ignored it. I didn't want to believe it. After all, I had come so far, and Nathan had been the one to help me get there. Surely, if things were changing, it wasn't because of him. It was just business, I thought. The first sign of real tension came when we launched the new project that had consumed so much of my time and energy over the past few months. We were tasked with delivering a breakthrough product, one that had the potential to reshape the market. Everyone was excited, but the reality of the deadlines and demands soon set in. I had done everything I could to keep things on track, but unforeseen obstacles kept popping up. Delays with the software development team, miscommunication with the client, and budget overruns. I had reported these issues early on, making sure everyone knew the risks. Nathan, however, insisted we move forward, always pushing for more, for better, for quicker results. The pressure grew unbearable, and I started to feel it. The pressure to keep up, to meet the impossible expectations, to please Nathan. Then the cracks in our relationship started to widen. It was during one of our late-night meetings that the shift became undeniable. Nathan, in front of the entire team, snapped. He tore into me for what he called poor management and lack of foresight. I had tried to explain the circumstances, how some things were out of our control, but he wouldn't hear it. His face turned red with anger, and in that moment, I realized Nathan was no longer the mentor I once looked up to. He was someone I didn't even recognize. But I couldn't confront him then, not when I was still depending on him to salvage this project in my career. So I bit my tongue, took the blame, and promised I would make it right. I wasn't ready to lose everything I'd worked for, especially not over one project. That was the first crack in the foundation of our relationship. From then on, it only grew worse. The tension between us became palpable, but I couldn't bring myself to confront it. I had too much to lose. But what happened next, what happened in that meeting, would change everything. It wasn't just about the project anymore. It wasn't just about the mistakes. It was about something deeper, something personal. And that would be the beginning of the end.
The days leading up to the meeting were a blur. The weight of the impending review pressing down on me like a constant suffocating cloud. Every email, every phone call with Nathan felt off, like I was walking on eggshells, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The small, dismissive comments in passing had become more frequent, each one more pointed than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling that Nathan was distancing himself from me, and I couldn't understand why. Hadn't I proven myself to him? Hadn't I done everything he asked? But every time I tried to bring it up, he'd brush me off. "Everything's fine, Emily," he'd say, though his eyes never met mine. That was the first sign that something was wrong. Nathan had always been the kind of leader who made sure his employees knew where they stood. Clear, direct. But now there was something in the air, something unspoken that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just Nathan's behavior that had me on edge. It was the subtle changes in the office. People who used to smile when I walked past them now avoided eye contact. Conversation stopped when I entered a room. My team, once full of energy and optimism, was suddenly quiet, tense. Everyone had their heads down, working harder than ever, but the camaraderie that had once made the office feel like a second home was gone. I began to wonder, were they all in on something? Were they all turning against me? I spent sleepless nights replaying every interaction, trying to figure out what had changed. The project had its hiccups, yes, but we were still on track. We were still going to deliver. So why did it feel like Nathan was looking for someone to blame? Why did it feel like I was being singled out? I started to dig deeper, quietly checking emails and tracking project timelines. And that's when I found it. The first piece of the puzzle I had been missing. Nathan had been secretly talking to a rival company about partnering on a new initiative. The very initiative that we had been working on for months? But what really hit me was the timing. The conversations had started just days after the project delays became public. It wasn't a coincidence. Nathan wasn't just trying to protect the company, he was protecting himself. And I was the fall guy. The paranoia crept in, seeping into every conversation, every interaction. Were they all in on it? Had my colleagues known about Nathan's backdoor dealings? Had they been complicit in this slow betrayal? Every interaction, every sideways glance began to feel like a piece of a larger puzzle I couldn't quite piece together. I knew that the upcoming meeting wasn't going to be a simple review. It wasn't going to be about the project. It was going to be a reckoning, and I needed to be ready for whatever was coming next. But the worst part, I still didn't know if I was being paranoid or if I had really uncovered something. Was I the scapegoat in a game I didn't understand, or had I finally been given a glimpse of the truth? I had no answers yet, only questions. And with every passing minute, I felt more and more trapped in a situation I couldn't control. The meeting was coming. I had to face whatever Nathan had in store. Would I be ready? Or would I let him destroy everything I had worked so hard for? The clock was ticking.
The day of the meeting arrived like an inevitable storm. I could feel the tension in my bones as I walked into the conference room, the weight of the last few weeks bearing down on me. The air was thick with anticipation, and for the first time, I noticed something in the eyes of my colleagues, something that looked like pity. It wasn't a look I was used to receiving, but in that moment, I couldn't ignore it. Nathan was already seated at the head of the long glass table, his face expressionless, his posture rigid. The usual charm, the easy smile that used to make him seem like a mentor, was gone. He didn't even acknowledge me as I walked in. His gaze was fixed on the reports laid out before him, the same reports that had caused the project delays, the same reports he'd been scrutinizing for the past week, trying to find someone to blame. "Let's get this over with," Nathan said flatly, his voice cutting through the silence. The meeting began as I had expected, an attack on everything that had gone wrong in the project. But this time it was worse. This time the focus wasn't just on the project delays, it was on me. He started with the numbers, pointing out missed deadlines and financial overruns. But then, almost in passing, he dropped a bombshell that made my stomach turn. He accused me of purposefully hiding information, claiming that I hadn't communicated properly with the client, and even suggested that I was the one responsible for the breakdown in team communication. His words stung, each one a calculated blow meant to undermine my credibility in front of the entire room. "You have failed to deliver, Emily. The board is disappointed. The team is disappointed. And most importantly, I'm disappointed," Nathan said, his voice sharp. "We put our trust in you, and this is what we get?" I was taken aback. My heart raced, my thoughts scrambled, Everything I had done, all the late nights, the overtime, the meetings with clients, it didn't matter anymore. In Nathan's eyes, I was the problem, the failure. I tried to speak, to defend myself, but my words caught in my throat. How could I explain that this wasn't just my fault? How could I explain that the situation had been out of my hands? But Nathan didn't want to listen. He was on a mission, one that I had only just begun to fully understand. His accusations weren't random. They were calculated. This wasn't just about the project. This was about something far more personal. I realized, too late, that Nathan had been laying the groundwork for this moment for weeks. He had already made up his mind. He wasn't just going to blame me for the project's failure, he was going to make me the scapegoat for his own mistakes. The financial missteps, the communication breakdowns, the strategic errors, none of it would stick to him. It was all going to fall on me. And in that moment, the truth hit me like a freight train. Nathan wasn't trying to salvage the company, he was trying to salvage himself. This meeting wasn't about fixing the project, it was about saving his reputation. If he could pin everything on me, then he could walk away with his status intact. The betrayal stung like nothing I had ever felt before. I had trusted him. I had believed in him. And now, standing there, in front of my colleagues, I realized that everything we had shared, the late-night strategy sessions, the promises, the belief that we were working toward the same goal, had been a lie. I had been nothing more than a pawn in his game. As Nathan continued to berate me, the weight of his words began to sink in. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in on me. My vision blurred, and for a moment I felt like I might collapse under the pressure. But then something shifted inside me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something much colder. It was the realization that this wasn't my fight anymore. This was his fight, and I was no longer willing to play by his rules. I lifted my chin, locking eyes with Nathan for the first time during the meeting. I wasn't going to let him break me. Not today. "Let me make something clear," I said, my voice steady, though it felt like every word took everything I had. "I didn't cause these problems. You did. And now you're trying to throw me under the bus to save yourself. But I'm not going down that easily." The room fell silent. Everyone was watching now, waiting to see what would happen next. But Nathan didn't respond. He just stared at me, his eyes cold and calculating. For the first time, I realized just how much power he had taken from me, how much I had let him take, and now I was going to take it back. But what could I do? Could I really go up against him? Was I prepared to take the risk? As Nathan's words rang in my ears, something inside me hardened. This was just a beginning. I wasn't done yet. I left the meeting in a daze, every step feeling heavier than the last. I could still hear Nathan's voice echoing in my ears, the sting of his words sharp against my mind. He had shredded my career, my reputation, and every ounce of trust I had placed in him. I couldn't understand how things had gotten so bad so quickly. How had I become the villain in a story I wasn't even aware I was part of? The rest of the day was a blur of half-hearted conversations and awkward glances. People in the office avoided me. The usual friendly greetings replaced with uncomfortable silence. I kept my head down, moving through the hallways as quickly as I could, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere of betrayal. I went back to my desk, but the work I usually found so distracting felt irrelevant now. Nothing seemed important anymore. Not the project deadlines, not the meetings, not the emails. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I had worked for was slipping through my fingers and there was nothing I could do to stop it. In the days that followed, the silence grew louder. Nathan avoided me completely, refusing to acknowledge my existence unless it was to scold me or push the blame further onto my shoulders. I had tried reaching out to him once, asking if we could talk privately, but he had shut me down instantly. His cold dismissal a sharp reminder that I no longer mattered in his eyes. I became a ghost in my own office. The silence around me was deafening. The people who had once worked alongside me now looked at me like I was the enemy, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. I kept replaying the meeting in my head, trying to figure out where it had gone wrong, why Nathan had chosen to destroy me in front of the entire company, but no answers came. The emotional toll was worse than I expected. I wasn't just angry. I felt numb, disconnected from everything I had built. Each email I sent felt like a hollow effort. Each task a reminder of how little I mattered now. It was as if my presence had been erased, like I was just a piece of furniture that no one bothered to acknowledge anymore. The loneliness was unbearable. I found myself withdrawing, sitting in the silence of my apartment late at night, staring at the walls and wondering where it had all gone wrong. But there was a shift, a flicker of something deep inside me. I couldn't stay like this. I couldn't just let Nathan win. As much as I wanted to collapse into the quiet, into the numbness, I knew I couldn't, not after everything he had done. In the silence of those nights, something began to change within me. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It wasn't vengeance, not yet. It was a slow, quiet resolve, the kind that grows when you're backed into a corner and realize there's only one way out. The emotional collapse was necessary. It allowed me to see clearly. And in that clarity, I realized that I didn't need Nathan. I didn't need anyone to validate my worth. What I needed was to take control of the narrative. And I would. But not today. Not yet. For now, I needed to plan. I needed to be strategic. Nathan hadn't just humiliated me. He had made a dangerous mistake. He underestimated me. And in doing so, he had made a critical error. I wasn't going to take this lying down. I was going to make sure Nathan paid for what he had done. But I had to be smart about it. The first step was to take a step back, to allow the emotional dust to settle. I wasn't ready to confront him directly just yet, but I was getting closer. And once I was, I'd be ready. The silence had become my ally. Every passing day, the numbness of my situation began to morph into something else, something sharper, more focused. I had felt the sting of betrayal deeply, and at first I wasn't sure how to channel it. But now, as I stood in front of the mirror each morning, my reflection was no longer one of someone defeated. The person staring back at me was someone ready to act. It wasn't about revenge for the sake of revenge. It was about reclaiming my power. It was about showing Nathan and everyone who had doubted me that I wouldn't be his pawn, that I wasn't going to let his betrayal define me. I started by stepping back into my own mind, away from the office chaos. I cut out all distractions. No late-night drinks with colleagues, no social media scrolling, no unnecessary conversations. I needed clarity, and the only way to get it was to cut through the noise. The first thing I did was study Nathan. I researched his past, his career, his weaknesses. He was ruthless, yes, but he wasn't invincible. He had built his empire on the backs of people like me, people who worked hard, believed in the company, only to be discarded when he no longer had use for them. He had learned how to manipulate the system, to cover his tracks. But like anyone who builds their empire on the misery of others, there were cracks, and I was going to exploit them. The plan didn't come together overnight. I spent hours at my desk piecing together every detail, every email, every conversation that had taken place in the weeks leading up to the project's failure. I combed through emails, reviewed meeting notes, and spoke to former employees who had left the company under strange circumstances. What I uncovered wasn't just a pattern of corporate mismanagement. It was a blueprint for a deeper betrayal, one that could not only expose Nathan's failures, but could destroy his reputation in the process. I also started reaching out to key figures who might have information on Nathan's side dealings with competitors, people who had been overlooked, people who were angry but too afraid to speak up. Some of them had left Hays & Co. quietly, under Nathan's orders, but their resentment was still fresh. They just needed someone who was brave enough to help them make their voices heard. Each night, I reviewed everything I had gathered. It was like assembling a puzzle, each piece falling into place with perfect precision. And with each revelation, I felt more and more in control. I wasn't acting out of anger, though it had fueled my determination. This wasn't about a rash, emotional response. It was about carefully calculated moves, each one building toward a final confrontation that would shatter Nathan's empire. The world he had so carefully constructed, one based on lies and manipulation, would crumble under the weight of the truth. I began to think about the timing. Nathan was a master of presenting a flawless public image. I knew that. That's why the only way to bring him down was to do it in the most public way possible, to expose his darkest secrets where he couldn't hide them. I would take his own game and turn it on him. But I needed to make sure every move was perfect. I couldn't afford a single mistake. The more I planned, the clearer my path became. I was no longer the victim of Nathan's scheme. I was the architect of his downfall. But there was one more piece of the puzzle. I knew I needed leverage, something Nathan wouldn't be able to escape. I needed to make sure that when I confronted him, he couldn't just use his usual tactics of deflection and manipulation. It had to be airtight. And that's when I discovered something I hadn't expected. Something even more explosive than I could have imagined. Nathan had been involved in a series of shady financial transactions. Nothing too blatant, nothing that could be directly linked to him, but there were enough inconsistencies, enough questions that when exposed would make his position in the company untenable. It was perfect. This was the ammunition I needed. I spent the next few days drafting the plan, refining every detail. I had everything lined up. All I needed now was to execute. It was time to confront him, not just to get back at him, but to take everything from him. The control, the power, the illusion of invulnerability. I was going to expose Nathan for what he truly was. But I wasn't going to do it in a way that anyone would expect. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. This time, I was the one in charge, and Nathan, he would be the one scrambling to salvage whatever shred of reputation he had left. The game was on, and there was no going back.
Before I take you to the moment where everything changed, I need to ask you, what would you do if you found yourself in the same position? If someone you trusted betrayed you, left you out to dry, and turned your entire world upside down, would you fight back, or would you let them win? Tell me in the comments below. I want to hear your thoughts. What would your next move be if you were in my shoes? Stay tuned, because what happened next wasn't just about getting even. It was about taking back control. And trust me, you won't want to miss how I turned everything around. Now back to the story.
The day of the confrontation came faster than I expected, and everything felt like it was building to a breaking point. My heart raced as I walked into the office, the air thick with tension. I had everything I needed: proof, leverage, and a plan that was airtight. This wasn't just about exposing Nathan. This was about reclaiming my power and taking control of my own future. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and now it was time to execute. I called for a private meeting with Nathan, knowing he would never expect this. When he walked into the room, his usual cocky grin was gone. His face was a mask of frustration, the tension palpable. He could sense that something was off, but he didn't know what. "You wanted to see me?" Nathan said, his tone dismissive, as if this was another minor inconvenience in his day. He was used to being in control, used to dictating the terms. But today, I wasn't going to let him. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I had been preparing for this for so long that every word came out with precision, sharp and deliberate. "Nathan," I began, locking eyes with him, "I'm done being the scapegoat for your failures. You've lied, manipulated, and betrayed me, and now I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth about you." His eyes narrowed, but I could see the flicker of panic behind his controlled demeanor. He wasn't used to anyone challenging him, let alone threatening his carefully curated image. "You don't know what you're doing, but you're making a huge mistake," Nathan said, his voice laced with tension, but I could hear the hesitation, the slight crack in his armor. He was worried. I pulled out the files I had gathered. Emails, financial documents, testimony from people who had been silenced for too long. I laid it all out before him, one damning piece of evidence after another. "You've been lying about the project delays, manipulating the budget, and covering up your side deals with competitors," I said, each word landing like a punch. "This isn't just about me. It's about everything you've built, and I'm going to make sure the board knows everything." He took a step back, his face draining of color. I had him.
The once imposing figure who controlled everything with fear and charm was now standing there, vulnerable, exposed. "You can't do this," Nathan said, his voice shaking now. "I'm not ruining anything," I replied. "You already did that. You just didn't think anyone would find out." For a moment, there was silence between us, the weight of the situation hanging in the air. Nathan's power, the illusion of invincibility he had built, was slipping away in front of his eyes. This wasn't just about my revenge. It was about showing him that he couldn't control everything. He couldn't destroy me and get away with it. And then I dropped the final bombshell. "I've already sent this to the board," I said, holding up an envelope. "They'll have everything they need in the next hour. Your time is up, Nathan." His eyes flared with panic. "You don't know what you're doing," he spat. "You'll never get away with this." But I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had won. The moment I had been waiting for had finally arrived. Nathan, once the man who ruled the room with a single glance, was now powerless. The tables had turned. I stood there for a moment, watching as the reality of his downfall sunk in. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The power was back in my hands. "I'll be out of here, Nathan," I said coldly. "And when the board finds out what you've been hiding, you'll be lucky to have anything left at all." I turned and walked out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. It was over. But what Nathan didn't realize yet, what I knew and what no one else would understand, is that I hadn't just taken my power back. I had taken everything from him. The fallout would be monumental, and it was just beginning.
The days that followed felt surreal. I had watched the storm break, seen Nathan's world unravel as the truth came crashing down around him. He tried to fight it, denying, deflecting, even attempting to call in favors from his closest allies. But the evidence was irrefutable. The board's decision came swiftly, and Nathan was removed from his position as CEO within 48 hours. The company began an immediate internal investigation into his actions, and the public relations nightmare was only just beginning. The once dominant figure who had stood at the helm of Hayes & Co. was now a shadow of his former self, left to deal with the wreckage he had created. But for me, it wasn't about watching him fall. It was about the quiet victory I had earned. I had stood up, taken back control, and exposed the truth. I had regained my dignity, my integrity, and my power. The satisfaction of knowing I had done it on my terms without losing myself in the process was something I had not expected to feel. As for Hayes & Co., the company had a long road ahead. The betrayal had left a deep scar, and rebuilding trust within the team would take time. But I was no longer a part of the company. I chose to walk away, knowing that I had outgrown it. The same ambition that had driven me to succeed within its walls was now leading me in the new direction. I took a leave of absence, giving myself time to recover from the emotional toll of the battle I had just fought. The office, once a place where I had felt valued, was no longer where I wanted to be. I needed a new challenge, a fresh start, and I knew that this was my moment to find it. The emails of congratulations from colleagues, former mentors, and even clients began to roll in. Some expressed relief that I had taken a stand. Others were in awe of how I had handled the situation. It was validating to see that the people who truly understood what had happened supported me. But there were others, those who had sided with Nathan, those who had stayed silent during the worst of it, who quietly disappeared from my life. And I was okay with that. People like that weren't meant to be a part of my future. I didn't feel a need to gloat or celebrate. The victory, in the end, was far quieter than I had imagined. I didn't need applause. I didn't need recognition. I simply needed to know that I had stood my ground and that I had made the right choice. But there was still something missing. I still had questions. How had Nathan managed to hide everything for so long? How had he built such an intricate web of lies, and why had I never seen it until it was too late? I wasn't entirely free from the aftermath.
The impact of Nathan's actions had rippled through the company, leaving many employees in the lurch, unsure of where things were headed. Some had lost their jobs, others had been affected by the scandal, but I knew I had to move forward. I did my part, offering support to those who needed it, helping them land new positions, offering advice to those who had been affected by the chaos. But I knew my time at Hayes & Co. was over. I looked back at the mess I had walked away from and took a deep breath. I had gained so much more than I had lost. I was stronger, more aware of the games people play, and better equipped to handle whatever came next. The real work, the rebuilding of myself, had only just begun.
Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that the experience was not just about a battle with Nathan. It was about a confrontation with myself, my own values, and what I was willing to stand up for. The hardest part wasn't the public humiliation, the emotional exhaustion, or even the fear of losing my job. The hardest part was admitting to myself that I had allowed someone else to dictate my path for too long. For years, I had given Nathan my trust, my loyalty, and my hard work. I had believed in him, in his promises, in his vision. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of my own voice. I stopped asking the tough questions. I ignored the subtle red flags, the signs of manipulation, because I was too focused on proving myself, on climbing that corporate ladder, on impressing him and everyone else around me. It took the worst kind of betrayal to make me see the truth. I wasn't working for myself anymore. I had become a cog in someone else's machine, and in doing so, I had allowed myself to lose sight of my own power. But the moment I realized that, the moment I saw Nathan for who he really was, it was as if a switch flipped. I understood that I didn't need to beg for approval, for validation, or for a seat at the table. The power to shape my own future was always within me. It was just buried beneath layers of self-doubt and misplaced loyalty. Once I tapped into that, everything changed. The lesson I learned through this experience is simple, yet profound. Never let anyone else define your worth. No matter how high up the ladder someone is, no matter how much power they seem to wield, your value is intrinsic to who you are. Not what you can do for others, not how you can make them look good, not how much you can sacrifice in the name of ambition. This situation also taught me the importance of trusting my instincts. There were so many moments where I had a feeling that something wasn't right, that Nathan wasn't being entirely honest, but I brushed those feelings aside. I didn't want to believe that someone I had respected and worked so closely with could betray me so completely. But I should have listened to that inner voice sooner. Now, I trust myself above all else. I'm more cautious, yes, but I'm also more confident in my ability to navigate challenges. I've learned to value my intuition, to trust my gut when something feels off, and to stand firm in my convictions even when the pressure to conform is overwhelming. But the biggest takeaway? The importance of taking control of your own narrative. When Nathan tried to destroy me, he didn't realize that I still held the pen. I had the power to write my own story, to choose my own path. And when you take that power back, when you own your story and refuse to let anyone else dictate your future, there's no force on earth that can stop you. In the end, the betrayal wasn't just a blow to my career. It was a gift. It forced me to face my fears, to understand my true strength, and to realize that the only person who could ever hold me back was myself. I've moved on from Hayes & Co., but I'll never forget what I learned there. And while Nathan may have been the villain in this story, in many ways, he was also my greatest teacher. He showed me what I was capable of, what I was willing to fight for, and what I could accomplish when I stopped looking for someone else's approval. Now, my story is mine again, and this time, I'm in control.
Now that you've heard my story, I want to hear yours. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted? How did you rise above it? If you found this story empowering, make sure to drop a comment below and share your thoughts.
What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you fight back or walk away? Your experience might just inspire someone else who's going through something similar. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe, because this is just the beginning. There are more stories coming that will not only make you think, but will remind you that you hold the power to change your own life, no matter how impossible it might seem. So, what's your next move? Let's talk about it in the comments. And stay tuned, because there's more to come.